Well, good afternoon, James Giron. This is Kathleen Dudley. You don't see me in this interview. I'm behind the camera. And James, welcome and thank you for coming.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me here.
My pleasure. So James and I have known one another for a number of years now, and I have been very much impressed with James's knowledge, intellect, strength, courage from his within his own self, and then obviously from his family, his roots, his ancestry, comes out very strongly to me. And we got to talking one day about the book I'm writing called Women's Worth, Man's Worth, The Overfed Body, the Underfed Soul. And we went off on this very long and interesting conversation, and I knew then that I wanted to interview you, James. So thank you very much for coming forward.
Most definitely. Most definitely.
So the subject that we're going to be talking today is about the planned destruction of our men. And James, before we start this, if you could maybe just give us a little bit of information about yourself.
Well, I've been on quite the journey these past 3 to 4 years, spiritual and otherwise, trying to find myself, trying to re-identify my manhood and what it really means to me. And also understanding the people who have taken it away from us and really misconstrued the idea of who we are as men. And I've taken that idea back, and I'm trying to formulate it in such a way that it could be beneficial for me and my relationships. You know, aside from that, obviously I have different things that I'm into, and I'm trying to accomplish a range of different things, but I feel like the main goal has really been revamping myself as a man. And that has really helped me to understand what I want to do, my passion and my purpose in life as well.
And James, you're a student of many different disciplines. You're a student of history, of philosophy. Talk a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit of your passions in those areas, please.
Well, I've had a deep fascination for every type of form of knowledge that you could really get your hands on. The past few years I've had a hunger for that type of knowledge, and it's what's kept me fed more than anything, you know. From everything from understanding my roots to my history, to really the people that are attempting to manipulate that and control that. And you know, that's where I have a big issue with, is trying to fight against that narrative, you know, because I don't like to go with the conventional narrative. I'm trying to go the exact opposite of what everybody else is doing, because I see that's the only way we as men could actually accomplish something, is by doing something the opposite of what's being fed to us to do.
And James, can you explain how you came to that understanding of taking the opposite? Because most people are quite content to do what they're told and to follow the mainstream. And what is it about you? And I must add to that, that's part of my attraction to you when I first met you, was that you were outside the box and you were thinking on your own. How did you come to that?
To be honest with you, I feel it's been a spiritual journey first that's allowed me to gain an understanding and a knowledge to really step outside of that. And what I mean is, by gaining the knowledge of different things and different ideas, I've been able to separate myself away from the psychological engineering or the social engineering that's been implemented on every single one of us. It's taken a lot of time and a lot of effort, and of course, it doesn't happen overnight. But it's been a fascinating journey. There's really no way to explain that. I don't feel like I've done anything extraordinary. I feel like I've done pretty much what every other individual in this life is capable and is supposed to be doing. That they've pursued them, that I've pursued just like they should be pursuing an actual purpose in this life. And without that purpose, what can you really understand about yourself? And they've taken away that purpose. And when I say they, you know, I'm talking about the people manipulating behind the scenes socially and psychologically. So I don't feel like I've done anything special per se. I feel like I'm doing what I should be doing and what everybody else should take the time to do.
So, James, as far as the social engineering, can you talk a little bit about what you mean by the social engineering, what that looks like, the elements of it, and then the follow-up on that is, how did you discover that there was social engineering?
Well, oddly enough, there was a author who I have a deep fascination for, Dr. E. Michael Jones, and he's been censored all over the internet, still trying to censor his books and his works. But he's the one that actually put me on to the idea. There's many different tiers to the social engineering. You know, there's the economic part of it, the social part of it, the moral part of it. However, that's really where I got the first thoughts and ideas from it. There was a book that I had read by Gunnar Myrdal. He was a Swede, and he actually, it was claimed to be put out by him, but it was actually put out by several different authors, CIA operatives, and people all from certain walks of life within different government sectors. He put out a book, 3 volumes actually, and it really spoke on the idea of the social engineering. So that's kind of what put me onto that idea, and several different other works. And then I started to look back and realize what's going on with me, what's going on with our society, and I kind of put 2 and 2 together, correlated the 2, and realized that this is the situation that we're in. Yeah.
So would you define social engineering for those of us who might have some questions about what does it look like, what exactly is social engineering?
Well, I would say it's the manipulation of the culture and the manipulation of the morals towards a political end. That's what I would say social engineering really is. It's implemented by many different people for many different reasons. You even see it throughout history, but I think right now, with our current state, it's really as a means for a political end. Whatever agenda that may be, there's different ones, of course, for every form of government right now. But it's to control us. It's to control us.
And James, I mean, talk a little bit about your family background in terms of your ancestors, and maybe I'm just figuring that you've studied your ancestry thoroughly. So perhaps explain a little bit about what they struggled with over time.
Yeah, to some extent I know part of the struggle of my ancestors. There's obviously a lot of indigenous blood that I carry. My mother, her mother, they all have indigenous blood, and they all have their own battles that they fought, literally and figuratively. But I mean, that fighting spirit, I feel, is still evolved in me, and I think is still kind of taking hold day by day, to kind of rebel against our oppressors, really. I feel like a lot of us share the same ancestry, even if we don't know it. We all have a fighting spirit within us. It's just a matter of us trying to activate it, regardless of the DNA, regardless of the bloodline. We still all share that oneness between all of us, and that's something we have to remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very good. So James, when we were talking earlier, I'd mentioned, what I had been delving into was primarily the environmental assault against our men through food and pesticides and herbicides, and yet there's all the wars. I think it's all the wars that have taken our young men and used them as cannon fodder for economic gains, and the banking system is behind all the wars, and the central banking system is behind everything that is happening today. So for folks who don't know that, they might want to start digging rather deeply into that.
I would say that they should. Whether, like you said, it's from the endocrine system being assaulted by the aluminums and the different heavy metals that are completely and utterly destroying not just the endocrine system, but our whole entire our whole reproductive system as a whole is under attack. And of course, we could sit here and talk about that for hours. You know, if people really want to understand that, they have to take it upon themselves to dig for the knowledge and understand what it is that we're being assaulted with, you know. There's so many different vectors that are a problem right now, from the soys to the, you know, everybody talks about the soybean and how bad it is for the male hormones, and the aluminum, of course. I mean, there's so many different things. We're getting hit from all angles, and even socially and morally, we're being hit. You know, we're being influenced by certain agendas that aren't our own. But you know, to really gain a deep understanding of that, you have to look for it yourself, and you have to really want to understand, for you and for your children and all the future generations, who and what are the people that are trying to destroy us. Otherwise, we really don't stand a chance against the current oppression, and we don't, unless we take a stand.
So James, you've taken a stand, and you know, you shared with me, and I'd like to ask you questions about your process, because
Sure.
You said that you had fallen into the all-American diet,
Yeah.
and that it changed you, and you woke up one day, and you decided that that was not the route that you were going to take.
Sure.
You talked about your generation being infiltrated by the whole concept of pornography, and and with the cell phones and the access to pornography on cell phones, that everybody in your generation was exposed to it, whether they wanted it or not. I mean, those weren't your words, but I'm kind of gathering that that's what happens. Yeah. So can you maybe just kind of walk us through what happened to you? Because you described yourself physically, and then what you started to do to change. Could you describe your physicality of what happened with eating that all-American diet with soy and everything else? And
well, I grew up as most kids here in America, and now all over the world, the westernized world, grow up. The McDonald's, you know, all the different fast foods, the Walmarts and the Lowe's and all the junk that they have to offer. That's what I was exposed to. That's what my parents understood. They didn't really realize the repercussions that I had on the body at the time, nor did I. So of course, I'm eating that for years. I'm gaining weight, I'm getting obese, I'm getting more and more unhealthy. My mental health is falling, it's deteriorating. And I don't really know what's going on, what the cause of it all is. You know, eventually I changed my diet, and it's still changing. You know, I'm still cutting off certain things. I'm still trying to understand what the perfect fluctuation is for our current situation, because, you know, what a lot of people consider healthy now isn't actually healthy.
so what did you change? I mean, what do you eat now? Tell me.
Well, I was under the impression at first that veganism was the way to go about it. You know, understanding the science and not the manipulated corporate-based science, the pseudosciences, but the actual science. I realized veganism wasn't the way to go, so I started incorporating different foods, removing different foods from the grains to the unpasteurized dairy, which is really deadly, you know, to be eating unpasteurized dairy, or rather
pasteurized.
To not pasteurized dairy. So just changes in diet really helped me to regain my mental health, you know, which I had been dealing with for about a year, a whole range of different symptoms. You know, and it's not just me. You know, they're saying 1 in 3 Americans are now dealing with mental health issues.
What kind of symptoms did you experience on the all-American diet with all of the soy and the additives and the crap that
the
changes our minds?
The fillers and the binders.
Yes, cytotoxins.
Cytotoxins. Well, I developed what they would consider to be schizophrenic symptoms. But of course, the idea and the branch of what schizophrenia is really doesn't correlate to its actual meaning. It's more of an umbrella term, and it has many different causes. But, you know, from the auditory hallucinations to the visual hallucinations, extreme, profound anxieties. I dealt with all of that. And with a simple switch of the diet, I actually alleviated about 90% of my symptoms.
That's really profound.
It is profound.
So,
and in fact, this was even before I introduced any type of vitamin or nutrient protocol. This was just food, pure food, no additives.
Well, when you say pure food, you mean pure all-American fast food?
No. Organic.
But this was prior to introducing the good food.
Correct. Prior to introducing to the good food, I was dealing with all these symptoms. And even as a child, you know, a lot of behavioral health issues, delinquency and so forth, that are all a result of the all-American diet. You know, a lot of people don't realize that most of the kids walking around, whether they have ADD, ADHD, all these psychiatric disorders, it all correlates back to the foods that they're eating and the environment, from the cell phones, the high electromagnetic fields, the higher gigahertz ranges that are really damaging the brains, damaging the cells. Even to the light, you know, the spectrums of light that we're constantly being exposed to, primarily the blue light, and how damaging it is to the brain. It's all these different things that, as it would anybody else, broke my mind down. So getting off of that and getting on something that's not just plausible, but something that we should have never had taken away from us in the first place is what helped me regain my mind.
Fantastic. And so, I mean, I think about how processed foods, packaged foods, all the commercial foods, the chips, the sweets, the chocolate bars, all of these things with you know, red dye number 3 and yellow dye number 4 and blue dye number 16, and then of course all the bisphenol A's in the plastics, and everything's wrapped in plastic, and I mean it becomes a cascade of chemicals that come through to the cell level, and they message the brain. And how else could that connection in the brain go but explode?
It does explode, and whether it's the dopamine or the neuropinephrines or whatever synapse is being overtaxed, it doesn't really make a difference, you know. It's all a result of the same thing. And of course, this level of psychiatry still isn't being discussed, you know. I don't know when it'll be accepted, but hopefully soon. That's what I'm trying to make happen, is for that level of psychiatry and understanding to really be implemented into the mainstream allopathic style of medicine, because it's just destroying countless people. Even here in the state of New Mexico, you know, one of the highest rates of mental illness, and nobody's being helped, and they're all being fed the same crap over and over again.
Yes. Yeah. So James, describe a little bit about then what you started to eat and what kind of choices, and perhaps even a time sequence of when you began to notice a change in your mind, in your body.
Well, I will say this, surprisingly, and this is for anybody who is dealing with any type of mental health issue, whether it be Alzheimer's or even autism, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, whatever. You know, there's so many different names that they have for it, but it all falls down to the same thing, misstep in your biochemistry, essentially, right? Orthomolecular medicine is the way that my life was healed and saved. You know, and this is an old school type of medicine. It's just high dose vitamins and minerals, the removal of toxins, all these different things. That's the end all be all for mental health, at least the beginning step. And that's what it was for me. So what happened essentially that got me into this, because I had no idea. As I was feeling a lot of these symptoms, the anxiety, I was getting a lot of racing thoughts, what they would consider to be schizophrenic symptoms, right? And I started taking vitamin C because of an issue that I had with my adrenals. They're really taxed, you know. The main store of vitamin C in the body is the adrenals. So I had a friend recommend it to me. So I started taking it with the bioflavonoids every single day. And within a matter of a couple of days, my symptoms started to disappear.
Wow.
The voices, the fear, the anxiety started to completely disappear. Of course, that was just one part of the journey. I didn't understand the level that the nutrients was going to play in regaining my mental health until just recently. But that was a beginning step to healing my brain.
Very fine, very fine. And so, would you talk a little bit about, you said that the introduction of, and how quickly did that happen? I mean, in terms of, you said you'd gained a tremendous amount of weight, and then, and the estrogenic influences of the foods. You had man boobs, and you told me also that when you lost weight and got away from those chemicals, your voice dropped. I mean, talk a little about that.
Yeah, I started to feel less timid, more bass in the voice, of course. You start to feel,
because you have a deep voice.
Yeah, and you start to feel more as a man should feel, in a way, I guess you could say, ready. I mean, you're more aggressive, you're ready to take things, instead of like, I don't know, I always felt like as if I was very timid for the most part. Even though I didn't outwardly express it, I always felt relatively weak in my emotion, which I don't feel now at all, and I haven't felt for many years. But I think that was a huge part of it. I know that was a huge part of it, was the biochemistry,
So so reclaiming, in essence, you're being a man and that warrior posture.
Through biochemistry.
Through biochemistry.
And a lot of people may not be able to believe that. They may think it's not so simple, you take a couple of vitamins or whatever the case may be and remove some toxins and all of a sudden you're a man. But for anyone who doubts that idea, they have to really understand what the biochemistry is and how it affects the body and the brain and the development. It does so many different things that it could change a person from being a murderer or a career criminal to being a successful doctor or businessman. And it really can. And this is proven. You could look at Dr. Walsh, for example, out of Chicago. Treated many inmates, many criminals, healed all of them, and they all were repeat offenders who never repeated again. The biochemistry is the beginning, and I think that's why it's being targeted the way that it is. Because if you can attack that, you can attack the whole entire person and break the soul down too. So I think, yeah.
Well, and like you say, having a purpose is critical to you, and we know that everyone needs a purpose. Sure. But when our men have been basically redirected and not given opportunities to fulfill their purpose of work. I mean, work and accomplishment to a man is akin to life.
It is.
And so that's like absolutely destroying a soul of our men. It really
is, and you could say that it is a combination of, like I said, okay, the biochemistry, but it's the feminization too within the society, stripping away the father figures, stripping away any predominant male role and trying to act as if a feminine role could take that place when it can't. It has its place in a man's life, but it can't completely take that over. And that's why I think a lot of men are unable to actually fulfill what their life goal is and their purpose, because they don't know, they're so confused as to what it means to actually be a man that they can't express that in a healthy way. And I think it turns a lot of people into a way, it turns the whole table for them because they can't really understand themselves. So they don't really accomplish anything, They don't know what to accomplish. So in my opinion, the only way to really go about that is to embrace the masculinity again and not allow it to be shamed and stepped on. We have to really take that back. And I think there's several ways that we could do that, But the number one way is getting more in touch, getting out of the communal services that we're doing day by day within the world, and getting more into our own being, and stepping away from everything that everybody else is doing, looking at them and realizing and asking yourself whether or not it's something that you should be doing too. And that's really the first step, is to take a step back and be mindful of what they're doing, and make sure that if you don't like their behavior, not only do you speak up about it, but you also make sure that you don't mimic that same behavior and continue that cycle. And that's what I'm trying to do, is step away from what everybody else is doing, like I've said. And it's been really helpful. Yeah.
So, in this last year and a half, where quite literally there has been, these overlords have been determining our lives.
Yeah.
And they have, without any legal rights, they have relied upon submission by the people. And I look around and I say, where are our men? Because, people are muzzled.
Yeah.
Our men are muzzled.
Yeah.
So what do we do about that, James? Because we need our men. Because right now our women and our children are on the front lines. Our men are eating too much soy and flax seeds 4 times more estrogenic than soy. And our men are walking around in the streets and riding their bikes, and they're everywhere muzzled. Well, how can the warrior wear a muzzle?
Well, the warrior definitely cannot wear a muzzle, and I think that's the evil genius behind this plot, is to really completely strip the man of his voice. And perhaps the society too has made us feel as if we can't speak. Because if we do speak, you know what I mean? If we do speak, there's something against us completely as men. And women have been put in, and they're being attacked too, don't get me wrong, but they've been put in this position over men in society. And that position is really destroying us as a whole. Because now we can no longer be men and they can no longer be women.
Well, and we're seeing that move to the transhumanism through Klaus Schwab with the World Economic Forum. And his concept is, let's move it into AI and transhumanism, where we no longer have the separation of the male and the female. And we have a circumstance there where we're not even given a choice whether or not we want to go there. So, and that's been in place for a long time, and we can go and look at the entire agenda of that, as well as the United Nations with their Agenda 21 and their Agenda 2030. You just go on the internet and you can read exactly what they are telling us is happening. The Great Reset. We no longer will own our homes, we'll rent, we will have no need to be thinking, we have no need to have a purpose, essentially.
Correct, because their purpose, in their minds, their purpose is our purpose. And it's been like that for a long time. I mean, we could go back into history, but I think the real important time is now. Obviously, you can't understand the past, or the present, without understanding the past, but there's a lot of conjecture as to what they're actually trying to do. We could say they're trying to wipe out the human race. We could say they're trying to wipe out our warriors first. As to what they're actually trying to do, we're still attempting to understand that. But the fact is, whatever it is that they are doing, it doesn't matter what their end goal is. The fact is, we're letting them come in and corrupt our culture and corrupt our morals. And we have to ask ourselves, why are we allowing them to actually do this? Why are we allowing them to manipulate us, regardless of what their end is? Whatever psychopathic ideas that they built in their minds is not something that we have to accept. So we got to really stand up and realize that regardless of what they want, it doesn't have to be what we want, and it shouldn't be.
Very good. Well, and very true, because it's our lives.
Exactly.
I mean, we never signed on when we were born to someone else's agenda.
Exactly.
We have our birthright to be free and to choose and to be healthy and to raise our children in a free society. In fact, the Constitution gives us some fundamental rights to free speech, and we're seeing that centered everywhere. We're seeing the attack against the Second Amendment and the Third and the Fourth. We're beginning to see an implosion, but how do those implosions happen? They happen through submission. They happen when people don't stand up for their rights. And so getting back to this whole thing about where are our warriors, where are our men, you know, I can't help but think of the destabilization of societies through pornography. And we've seen that in countries all across Europe. We saw that in Germany in the 30s. Drugs and pornography were brought in, and then soon so much prostitution and it's destabilized that country. And we've seen that here. We see that in all of the countries. Wherever drugs and pornography are brought in, it destabilizes it. It takes out the moral fiber and the integrity. Can you talk a little bit to your experience with that and how you broke that addiction?
Yeah, and there's a reason why they pushed the sexual liberation, just like they did in the 60s. It's funny, right? Because right after the sexual liberation in the 60s, the next thing they did is introduce the credit card. You know? So you ask yourself, why are they doing these things? And it's not brand new. A lot of the ancients understood that if you could control the morals of society, you could control them politically. Takes me back to Dr. E. Michael Jones. He put a book out, Libido Dominandi, and it's Sexual Liberation as Political Control. That book really opened my eyes to understanding what our current situation is. And if anyone ever gets the opportunity, I think they should definitely read it. You know, pornography is a form of political control. It's been weaponized intentionally. Until you can understand that it's been weaponized not just to corrupt the culture, but to make us move towards their ends, until you can understand that, it's hard to want to break out of that, because you feel free. You feel as if you've been liberated, because that's the idea that they're trying to shove down our throats. But there is no liberation in a lack of morals. Or I should say, there's no liberation in vice. There can never be liberation in vice.
Good point.
In fact, he even quotes in his book, St. Augustine in the City of God. He says that a man has as many masters as he has vices, because you don't serve one man alone. You know, you serve all your vices. So you got to ask yourself, who am I going to serve?
Very, very. And so, I mean, when we break our addictions to things, you know, like I threw away my cell phone about a year ago. That was pretty big,
right?
Because you know, text messages and, you know, all the adrenaline rush and, you know, and somehow you feel connected when things are rather feeling isolating.
Sure.
And an addiction to pornography, which is, it's become as indoctrinated and as accepted as alcohol.
Yes, it has.
Or the use of marijuana, which when that first happened, you know, Justin Trudeau legalized it all across Canada. And then, of course, there are numerous states in this country where pot is legalized. But what we see also is the dulling of the minds, not to speak of all the estrogenic, synthetic estrogen that's soaring through our men's bodies and creating man boobs. But there's something that happens there, and those addictions set up. And so how did you break that addiction? Because that's a big deal. It's a huge congratulation.
It is, you know, and it's been a process. It's still a fight, not just with all vices that I have, because we all have them. But the goal in this life is to attempt to reduce them to the smallest amount possible, if not get rid of them. But I don't think anybody officially ever gets rid of all their vice. At least not in this life, you know. But the way that I really went about it is through knowledge and through understanding. You know, I bought several books, cognitive therapy, There's a great one, Aaron Beck's Cognitive Therapy and Ancient Christian Wisdom. Great book. I combine those. There's another book, Fight the New Drug. It's like a step-by-step program to really deprogram yourself from everything that I've lived with since I was a kid, that I was exposed to since I was a kid. And it's not just me, you know, the whole world is addicted to this junk. In fact, I had heard a story, and this gives a good perspective on pornography and its political control, that when the Israelis had taken over a certain part, it was a city somewhere, or a province, right, somewhere in the Palestine area, they forced all the citizens inside. And when they forced them inside, the first thing that they did was they broadcasted pornography. And I thought it was very interesting. You know, there was like one channel on there, and the only channel was the pornography. They forced them all inside, and they almost coerced the people to stay there and watch these programs. Well, you gotta ask yourself, why would they possibly do that? That's kind of what woke me up to really realize I don't want to be controlled by these people, especially for the idea of pleasure, which no man should really just be seeking pleasure to begin with. You know, Aristotle says that only brutes and children seek pleasure. And we shouldn't be seeking pleasure anymore, especially at this crucial time where we should be standing up for something of worth instead of sitting down for absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Well, interesting too, I understand that Israel was one of the prime producers of pornography. And during this whole COVID fiasco, that the pornography sites have been made free, accessible, along with the pot stores and the places that sell liquor, and at the same time the yoga studios and the gyms and the spas and all of the healing centers have been closed. Right. So we know there's something so nefarious in all of this.
Very nefarious.
There's a planned attack there to take people down. Could you talk a little bit about? I know you said, you know, that in your experience, women don't want men. The women of your generation don't want men. Don't want who you are, and you know, we have a big responsibility, a big role in this, because we would not be here today even talking if there wasn't man, woman.
Well, you see, speaking on that idea, and that's a great idea, and I'm glad you brought it up. You know, just looking at the dating scene, for example, for men my age, it's trash. It's so horrible because women have been so programmed and idealized to put this idea of a man that they think they deserve versus what they should really be getting. And what I mean by that is they're so concerned about getting these high-value men that they've forgotten about every other single man who's either building or who's content. And that's taken away from the household, as in women are no longer wanting to be mothers unless there's a stipulation to the motherhood. In other words, unless there's some type of fame or fortune that comes with marriage, it's no longer looked at as a legal agreement or as a necessity, but men now are looked at as a luxury. And we got to step away from that idea, because men aren't a luxury. We have to have our women understand that there's a place in society for everything, and we can't be so brainwashed to really think that we can't settle, if that's the word you want to use, which a lot of women use, because a certain man doesn't meet a certain criteria that's been made up in society, but doesn't actually fit an accurate description. You know, some men don't have the ambition. I think all men should, but a lot of men don't. But that doesn't mean that they should be discriminated against, not just in the dating field, but in the field of marriage, because men control the marriage. You know, we are the ones that ultimately control the children and the marriage, but it's not being looked at that. And the minute that we stop looking at men as luxuries is, I think, the minute that we're going to start appreciating them more for marriage and for procreation, you know.
Mm-hmm. And what is your experience? You know, I mean, one of the things that I note the most going back to pornography is that women are looked at more as they're objectified.
Sure.
And then women take on that persona,
of course,
as being the object.
Of course.
And so present themselves that way and dress their little girls in very provocative clothing, and
right.
and the young children are sexualized early. And you know, it's and then we wonder why there's a really messed up dating scene out there, because all of a sudden everything has been sexualized.
Right.
And yet we know that relationship goes much more beyond the intimacy of a sexual relationship. There's trust, and there's respect, and there's the underlying elements of love, which, you know, is the basis of human life.
I agree. There is those things that are essential, especially for a woman. Men, I don't believe, completely feel that way in regards to the love, but for women, they should feel that way. That's a feminine thing to feel, and they shouldn't be stepping out of that. You know, they should embrace that. But you know, also the duty and the responsibility that comes with it is something that's completely disregarded nowadays too. And for me, that's the most upsetting thing, because a lot of men, we don't really care about love per se, but we have to understand that women want to feel that emotionally, and a lot of men can't provide that. You know, they don't know how to make a woman feel the way that they should make a woman feel naturally. And it could be also because of the feminization of our men. You know, we can't even associate charismatically to a woman the way that we could 50, 60 years ago naturally. It's so made up, whether because of the digitalized dating scene or whatever the case may be. There's several different reasons for it. You know, you could pick which one you agree with most, but the fact is that it's a huge problem. And it's removing the idea of a true relationship between men and women. And we could revert that back to the possibility of them wanting a transhumanistic society. It's a great evil genius. If you would really attempt to make a transhumanistic society, or a hermaphroditic society, what would be better than to completely ruin that connection and make women try to be men and men try to be women?
And that's the direction that it is going. Yeah. I mean, without a doubt, we're seeing that. And we're seeing leaders that are all the transvestites that are in positions of power. Yeah. You know, from Bill Gates and his wife, and Obama and his wife, and the governor of Wisconsin, who's actually a woman who's actually a man. And I mean, we're seeing it everywhere. We are. As startling as that is, but and even pedophilia is being brought into the open to be accepted as a legitimate posture. Sure. Which is outrageous to me, because again, you know, so I think, well, why is all this sexualizing of these young children happening? Well, it seems to dovetail in with, making pedophilia an acceptable way of being. So I guess this has been a great journey and exploration with you, and I'm wondering if maybe you could summarize some of the aspects that you think are the most important, and just tell us, this is a planned destruction of our men. It's very obvious. We're seeing it through wars. We're seeing it through the food. We're seeing it through the addictive substances that are infiltrated for destabilization, and the pornography. And so what do we do? What does a man do to reclaim himself in this journey?
My first thought is to stop supporting the individuals. There are thoughts and ideas. The individuals that are keeping us trapped and shackled to this mentality, you have to stop supporting their ideas. You have to stop going to the websites. You have to stop buying these cell phones. You have to stop going to the Walmarts and the Lowe's and doing, like I said, you got to stop doing what everybody else is doing. And you got to do something completely opposite of that. Otherwise, you're going to end up in the matrix, so to speak, that everybody else is in. So how do you get out of it? The only way to really get out of it, in my opinion, first, is mentally philosophizing yourself out of this. When you can do that mentally, I feel then spiritually and then physically you're going to be able to get out of this. A lot of people don't know where to start. Knowledge is going to be the beginning of all things. If you're not willing to embrace knowledge because of laziness or because you want to say that you don't understand, it's not an excuse anymore. You know, we have to actually take action, because if we don't take action and we're just stagnant constantly, how can a warrior, how can a man, it's as if so many good individuals could die because no good man stands up, you know. How long is that going to really take place? Because it's been going on for years. They say that we're facing one of the great, or the 6th mass extinction right now. And it's a reality. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's a reality. So you got to ask yourself, who do you stand for? Who do you care about? Who do you love? And what does that really mean to you? Or are you just going to pass your life by doing absolutely nothing, having no morals, no character, no true feelings towards anything of importance? Or are you actually going to embrace an idea that's life-changing and engrave your name and your spirit and your energy into history? What are you going to do? That's really the question that men need to ask themselves. And they need to go deeper into thought rather than just seeing what's in front of them, whether it be the drinking, the marijuana, the booze, or whatever, the women, whatever. Because it's all a distraction, it's all a vice, and we all suffer from it. But we got to really ask ourselves, how long are we going to allow them to make us suffer? Yeah.
Very fine. You know, as you're talking, it made, I mean, that was a wonderful conclusion. It made me think about seeds.
Yeah.
You know, when our seeds began to become manipulated in labs, and the hybrid seeds, and you know, suddenly the open pollinated seeds and the natural seeds were being infiltrated in the growing fields, and then they began the genetically modified seeds that actually had no next generation. You had to continue to buy seeds, and of course we gather seeds. So it's like today, our men have to protect their seed.
They do.
Because they have to protect them from the damage of the cell phone in the pocket, because it decreases the fertility and it also damages the DNA.
It does.
So we have to take those cell phones out. We have to recognize that the seed of our man is life, and that the woman and the man together are what are going to take us forward. So we have to look at that as so precious.
We do.
And without that awareness, without that education, we will not go forward. And predictions are saying, you know, 2060, 2070, if we follow this trajectory, we will no longer be able to reproduce.
They're even saying certain parts of Korea, certain populations of Korea are not reproducing at all, that they're already making themselves go extinct. And it's mainly because of this artificial world, you know, that we're living in. And that's fine. I appreciate and love technology, but it's a good idea. It's a good idea, but it's a bad tech. That's what the issue is. You know, so all this stuff needs to be redone. It needs to be rethought. And we need to take a stand, and we need to understand the technology and not let these people who are monetizing it and controlling it use it against us.
Yeah. And it's always been intended to be used against us.
Yes.
And, well, James Giron, what a fabulous interview, and I want to thank you for really coming up, stepping up, and being such a sovereign man as you are, and thank you for helping us all understand this more fully. Thank you.
Thank you.